Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in. Hi, folks. Hi, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome in, folks. How's it going? Good afternoon to you. Hello, Kiora, Natalia, Oi, Joseph. Hey, how's it going yourself? Can teach assist up and running. There's a beautiful restaurant at Vaughan. They have very good burgers, and all of them are very affordable. The restaurant is extremely famous and popular, especially among families. One of the family's meals is chicken nuggets. That's amazing. Extremely delicious restaurant. Daniel, get out of here. Boo, Daniel. Boo, boo. Boo. I read that entire thing. You made me read that entire thing. Boo. You got me. You got me. You got me, Daniel. You got me. Well played, Daniel. Well played. So do you want your 60 now, or should we wait till the end of June before I give it to you? Is that yeah? No? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in. Daniel just got me. Congratulations, Daniel. It's the first time I've ever been tricked. Just kidding. I'm gullible as heck. Does your family like Middle Eastern food? Yes. No restrictions. No restrictions. Any and all suggestions in and around the Vaughan area. I Googled it and I'm like, I don't know, man. If people live there, they know it better than anyone else, right? So if you want to email me that, if you want to post it in Classroom, that way I have it all. Yeah, is it another McDonald's one, Daniel? Don't worry. I can turn the 60 to a 50 if you really want. If you really want. No, I'm just playing. Welcome in, folks. Good afternoon. As you saw my post on Classroom, any and all suggestions would be welcome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I posted on Classroom for anyone who's in and around the Vaughan area. I have family moving there, and they were asking about food suggestions and restaurants. So if you have any, I'll be happy to hear them and make those suggestions. Ooh, I'm craving shawarma. That's a great. You should have sent that to them. Yeah, I will, Daniel. I will. Toppings. I don't know what that is. Is that a restaurant or a place to get food? Okay. Toppings. I'm making a list. So as we get people joining in. Alrighty, welcome in, folks. As you can see, I already have the lesson kind of up and running. I want to make sure we hit the ground running with this lesson today because I want to get you working on that lab as much as humanly possible. I recognize it is you got to work on it, and so I want to make sure that you have that time to get it done and dusted. Oops. There we go. So as we get more people in, I'll start to do attendance. We're just missing a couple of people still. And then once they join, I will be more than happy to get started. Okay, Alicia, Anna, Arlena, Ashley, Catherine, Celestine, Daniel, Dominic. Emily, Hamid, Han, Helen, Henan, Jaden, Janice, Jonathan, Joseph, Kiora, Maganjit, Luca, Maddie, Megan, Melina, Nathalia, Shafa, Tammy, the Ness, sweet. Alrighty, give everyone another minute or so and we'll get started. Hey, how's it going, Luca? All right, folks, it's 12:25. I want to get started to make sure we have enough time to not only finish this lesson, but to also answer any and all questions about the lab that some of you might have. So again, those of you who write down the lesson, Lesson 7, speciation. We're going to take a look at the connections between evolution, microevolution, natural selection, and the ideas of how a species gets made. So without further ado, it's 12:25. Let's jump into it and look at what we are talking about. Look at what we're talking about today. So lesson 7. Lesson 7, we're going to look at what's called microevolution in the context of speciation. So microevolution refers to small scale changes that happen within a species or a population as a result of natural selection favoring some traits over others. Now, what this means is that in a smaller population, normally we don't see evolution happen on small scales, but there are examples of microevolution that can have some small scale changes that leads to differentiation within a single species that ultimately allows for several different species to branch off over a long period of time. It's a little bit different in the context of evolution and natural selection as a whole, because the trait isn't necessarily selected for as we see in speciation. So, what is speciation? As I finish getting attendance down here. What is speciation? Well, it's the eventually, those changes that I talked about in microevolution are significant enough to form a new species. So these tiny, tiny changes within a population, they accumulate over time. And as a result of which, they can form a new species. No worries, Maddie. So this new species that can happen as a result of many, many, many microevolutional changes that natural selection is still a part of, it eventually can lead to different subspecies of a common ancestor. As we learned in Unit 1, that common ancestor that branches into many different similar species, that's as a result of not only microevolution, but the idea of speciation taking hold. So in order to understand fully what speciation is, we have to know what a species is. Is macroevolution just a bunch of microevolution? No, not quite. Not quite. Macroevolution is the large-scale natural selection that selects one trait over another or over several, whereas this is tiny, tiny little selections that add up to create new species and branches on that phylogenetic tree. Whereas I'll talk about the difference between the two of them a little bit later in this week, but I'll talk mainly about it today in the context of microevolution. It's those tiny changes over time that yield a new species, but it doesn't select for that trait over another one the same way that we looked at it in macroevolution. So in order to understand that context, we need to also understand what it means to be a species. And a species is its own population that breeds naturally with each other. And they also have separate gene pools. So the overall idea here is that a species, and I'll use the example to the right here with the big cat family, a species is unable to breed naturally with anything else, only within its species. So even though big cats are all very similar, they are unable to breed with each other as a result of being different species. Okay, so take a second. Those of you who just joined or those of you writing down, take a second to write this stuff down, and I'll answer any and all questions about these three main ideas before I move on to what a gene pool is, and then go on to connect it to this phylogenetic tree that we see. So take a second to write this down and ask questions if you have it. Uh-oh, we lost someone. No worries, Maddie. Oh dear. I didn't know cats could get colds. I mean, I'm sure it has the equivalent. Oh dear, a fever. Well, that's not good. It's an upper respiratory infection. Well, is she on antibiotics or is she on some type of antiviral? No, then she should be fine. Should be fine. All right, let's move on and take a look at what a gene pool is, because in order to understand what a species is, and in order to understand how it connects, you have to understand what a gene pool is. So what is a gene pool in the context of what we're learning today? Well, a gene pool, it represents any and all genes and alleles that are available within a population of a species, okay? So let me provide some context for this with regards to the big cat species. To the right, or I get, yeah, on the right of your note, you'll see the 4 different and unique species that have developed over long periods of time due to microevolution as well as speciation. So they had a common ancestor, one gene pool up at the top, one gene pool, common ancestor, bam. Okay. Now, this common ancestor tended to move around. It tended to move around. And as it moved around, right, it moves throughout the Serengeti of South Central and South Central and Central Africa. As that big cat moved around, which had a pretty average trait, it was large enough, it was strong enough, it was fast enough to hunt medium enough species, okay? It did so quite successfully. As time went on and natural selection took place in micro amounts, genetic variation or mutations led to some of the species being very quick. And as that species became very quick and it moved through, as there was variation in that species and some of them were quite quick, and as it moved through the Serengeti of Africa, it was able to hunt faster animals. And so what then eventually became cheetah had a slightly different genetic gene pool than that common ancestor that it predicated from. So its slightly different gene pool allowed for it to hunt faster animals. So as those big cats moved around South Central and Central Africa, that what eventually became the cheetah stuck around the areas that had faster antelope and faster species to hunt. So it stayed in that area and kind of created an offshoot of that common ancestor. The same thing can be said for lions. The same thing can be said for lions in the context of lions are very, very clever. And they're good at, specifically the females are good at hunting in packs. So as a result of this trait evolving due to mutation and natural selection and trait variation, the lion and lioness was able to stick to an area that could hunt animals that were more clever, but provided more food as a result of their ability to hunt in groups and tactics and use tactics that allowed for them to be successful. So again, as they were roaming through the Serengeti and the parts of South Central and Central Africa, the natural variations and traits within that common ancestor that developed more clever and more intellectually gifted at tactics and hunting versions of itself, that offshoot did it to become what we now know as lions over time. And then lastly, use this color, the jaguar that formed as a result of its common ancestor. Jaguars are powerful animals, some of the strongest that reside in Africa. They are able to take on animals and successfully kill animals that are almost twice as big and as sturdy as they are, because their powerful, powerful, powerful claws, powerful, powerful, powerful jaws allow for them to successfully hunt and kill those animals. Again, that was as a result of that common ancestor. It had that natural variation that allowed for traits to make it a little bit stronger. And that animal would stick around the areas that allowed for that to hunt successfully the bigger and stronger animals. So it stuck around in that area. And now we see that offshoot from that common ancestor. And over many, many years, we developed 3 unique species as a result. Now, I left out this little fella here. And the reason being is because this was as a result of human domestication. Okay. The smaller animals, the smaller variations, double highlighted here, they were found by animals and they were quite tame, quite small, and not very strong. Again, that genetic variation of that common ancestor. And as a result of it being small and a bit more tame and less violent, humans domesticated them to what we now know and now have as the domesticated feline. If you have a cat, your cat was once many, 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 many thousands of generations, millions of years ago, was once a part of the common ancestry that eventually branched off into the cheetah, the lion, the jaguar, and every one of the big cat species we have today. Dogs from wolves. Dogs are a little bit trickier. Because wolves in general, they didn't really have too many subspecies variations as a result of their environment. So they didn't differentiate naturally as much as the big cat family did. Whereas dogs, we really took the reins early and domesticated wolves as a result of their ability to hunt and to, for lack of a better word, help us out. So it's not quite the same because wolves variation did not lead to too many natural genetic variations. Oops. All right. Any questions about the ideas so far? All right. So far, so good. So again, it's important to realize when we look at this in the context of macro versus microevolution, microevolution, we see many, many different offshoots as a result of natural selection. And it's not so much that they're competing with regards to survival of the fittest. It's the idea here that there's a different species that develops from that original species as a result of variation that allowed for selection. It wasn't so much competition and survival of the fittest as it was that natural genetic variation and those micro traits and microevolution over a long period of time. Human beings are a really good example of microevolution, not to the extent of big cats, but with regards to some of the genetic variation that we see that allows for us to adapt in a certain area. We're still all the same species because those tiny, tiny variations really haven't shaped us into a different species. But at the end of the day, there are tiny variations. You know, people closer to the equator or further up north, in certain parts of the area that have malaria, all of those things are seen as like microevolutionary aspects because they allowed for a new trait or genetic variation to take hold and to provide that benefit. But in this case, it didn't really create a separate gene pool. All it did was differentiate a little bit with regards to genetic variation. So that key thing here for speciation is the idea of a new and unique genetic pool. Without that, you cannot have a new species. So each of these mutations happen in small populations and then separate to create new species. Correct, Dominic. That's exactly what happened. In small pockets of that common ancestor, that genetic variation led to a tiny population to be good at X. Cheetahs, for example, being fast to hunt faster animals. And then they just stuck around where the fast animals live because they could, whereas the rest of the species couldn't really. And as a result of them sticking around, they eventually developed into a new species. It's many steps along the way. Yeah, it's pretty neat. Microevolution as a whole, when you start to learn more about it in the next couple of days with me, I'll really try my best to connect it with some really interesting ideas. All right. Any other questions? Yeah, no worries. I'm in no rush. I'll let you hang out and ask questions / write stuff down if you got it, okay? So how did humans microevolve from apes? Well, that's a bit more complex. When we actually didn't go through microevolution, we went through macroevolution. Survival of the fittest definitely came to fruition here. This is why there's only one human species that evolved as a result of our predecessor and not a bunch of different offshoots like you see in the big cat family. We developed the frontal cortex to think and plan, and we killed everyone else that didn't have that, for lack of a better word, to compete for those supplies and those resources in the area. Our predecessor species did not survive. Those that did not change did not survive on account of us murdering them all, for lack of a better word. Survival of the fittest, kids. Nature is there's this thing, I don't remember if it was on Reddit or if it was on like Instagram or something, that back when I used to use all that stuff, and it was like the nature is metal, and it's like, good Lord, nature is like, whoo. Can you summarize macroevolution? Macroevolution is where a trait is selected for, and the organisms that have that trait, they survive and pass their genes on. The organisms that don't, they do not survive, or they don't pass their genes on. So in the case of the Galapagos finches, right? That's the best way to talk about macroevolution. The ones with bigger beaks, the size of the beaks increased. The ones that had smaller beaks, they did not pass their genes on as successfully. Whereas with microevolution, right? The cheetah, that offshoot cheetah from that original common ancestor, the common ancestor didn't stop being useful, right? It just changed and microevolved in other ways to fill those niches that we'll talk about later on when we look at allotropic and syntropic evolution. Yeah, macro is just like a way of saying like big scale, whereas micro is like tiny scale. All right, let's continue, because I'm sure this will help explain things a little bit more with regards to modes of speciation. We're going to look at the way in which reproduction isolation takes place and the mechanisms that support it. So reproductive isolation is, for all intents and purposes, keeping species separate from each other, and it prevents breeding or fertilization of species that are not like and not good at sharing those genes with each other. So we call the ones that prevent any breeding or fertilization from happening, we call that pre-zygotic mechanisms. Pre-zygotic, meaning before the zygote forms. So these are going to be methods and ways in which a species will not even come to fruition or not even mate or successfully create a zygote because of the specific mechanisms discussed here. So one really good one is behavioral isolation. Different courtship behaviors prevent certain species from intermingling and crossing their gene pools. So a good example here is male frogs have a very specific mating call that only attracts females of their own species. The males are selected for the ones that can make a distinct noise that draws the female. And the female are selected for the ones that can hear their own species call better, are able to more likely to pass on their genes. So you see now we're talking in terms of trait selection. The trait of creating that mating call in males, the males that do it really well, they pass their genes on, obviously. The females that hear it really well and can find it really well, they pass their genes on. And so that courtship behavior gets further strengthened over many generations. So behavioral isolation allows for different species that are similar, right? There are some frogs that are quite close in species type, but very specific species have very specific mating calls that attract a female in a very specific way, and that prevents that gene pool from mixing in a bad way. Another one is temporal isolation. Temporal isolation. Temporal meaning of time. And so as a result of this time isolation, we see different breeding times of different species. So flowers that are very good at mating and being pollinated and pollinating in the spring are isolated temporarily or by time from flowers that do their thing later on in the year or earlier in the year. So it prevents those things from intermingling their gene pools in a negative way, because some flowers are at the height of their reproductive capabilities at the beginning of spring, which is why your allergies tend to suck right now, because those species are like, this is their temporal, this is their time. And they're going to stop in a couple of weeks, and then new plants are going to do their thing come June-ish. And they're separate time-wise from each other, so they're not going to ever intermingle with their gene pools. Yeah, Emily gets it. I get it. Trust me, man. Allergy season it's tough, man. It's tough right now. And I'm staying inside all the time, too. Usually I'm more out and about and I'm dying better. So, you know, pros and cons, I suppose. Pros and cons. Never-ending allergies. Yeah, it's a bummer. It's a bummer. Weak, as Maddie says. Yes, Maddie, thank you. I know not all of us can be as strengthened in terms of their allergies as get out of here. Listen, us allergy folk got to stick together. So I get it. I get it. All right, let's take a look at ecological isolation. We'll talk a little bit more about Dominic and the team. Oh dear. We'll talk a little bit more about ecological isolation as we look at allotropic and syntropic later on. But let's take a look at the general idea of ecological isolation, in that similar species will occupy different habitats in the same area. So at the end of the day, they are separate from each other. They are separate from each other. Separate from maximum. What? Anyways, they're separate from each other in a way that the ecology prevents them from mating. So one species of bird prefers high in the mountains elevation versus another very similar species which thrives on lower elevation. They will never encounter each other. So it separates their gene pools by ecological means. So again, at the end of the day, we have many different mechanisms. Another mechanism is by mechanical isolation. What does the thing to the right say? For the writing in red? Yeah, I'll get to that when I read it. It's genitalia, though. Yeah, because we're going to talk about mechanical isolation. So the structural features of some animals prevent mating between species. So male and female genitalia are uniquely shaped depending on the type of species, and they may not be compatible with other species. There are some species of tiger and giant cats where the penis, for lack of a better word, has barbs that dig in to the female to prevent it from escaping, in order to assure that the copulation can take place and fertilization of the egg can take place. If that tiger tried to mate with a different tiger of a different species, the female's vaginal wall may not be strong enough to withstand the barbs, and as a result, the male tiger will, for lack of a better word, not be able to successfully mate with the female. So those are mechanical ways. Yeah, nature is metal, folks. That's the like common theme that I want to stick to with regards to learning about the next couple of lessons. Nature is how can we get the species to pass the gene on? That's it. Nothing else is in consideration. Nature's, why are you like this? Oh, I'm just the way things are. So in order to ensure that those structural features of male and female must be compatible. So in that same example that I said, the female of that tiger species, its vaginal wall is naturally stronger and thicker to allow for that successful copulation and fertilization of the egg. So it's those tiny mechanical structural features that allow for that species gene pool to stay consistent within its group. And then lastly, gametic isolation, those gametes that we've learned about so many, it feels like a million months ago, but just a couple of weeks ago where we looked at gametes. Gametes are not necessarily compatible with each other with regards to species. Yes, every species that mates sexually has sperm and egg, but there are certain chemical messengers on those sperm and egg that allow for it to mate correctly with its own species. 2021 is 1/3 done already. I know it's wild to think that. So sperm and egg in marine ecosystems specifically that are released into the water willy-nilly, the sperm is able to recognize the egg based on chemical markers and signals that both of them contain, and it allows for fertilization of same species to happen and prevents non-same species from fertilizing those eggs. All right, so those are pre-zygotic mechanisms. Before zygote formation, before zygotic formation mechanisms. So it prevents that zygote from ever really forming as a result of these mechanisms you see there. And are there any questions with regards to the pre-zygotic mechanisms? Pre-zygotic mechanisms. Pre-zygotic mechanisms. Pre-zygotic mechanisms. What do you think's coming up next? Those of you who haven't looked at the note. Post-zygotic, immediate, quick, Dominic response. Post-zygotic. All right, let's take a look at post-zygotic mechanisms because as alluded to, pre-zygotic, before zygote formation, post-zygotic or post-zygotic mechanisms are looking at fertilization and breeding can occur and does occur, but the offspring are not viable. And again, when we talk about viability, we're talking about it in terms of evolutionary context, unable to survive and pass their genes on, seen as unfit, and therefore will not pass their genes on. So what are we talking about? Well, the first is zygotic mortality. So some zygote that form will not actually survive and grow. So successful fertilization of the egg of the sperm. However, that zygote does not survive and grow. So some species of goat and sheep are actually quite compatible and can mate and can fertilize male sperm, fertilize female egg, but the zygote is not viable. The zygote will form, but it will not continue to go through mitosis to develop into that fetus because the genetic machinery within the cell has trouble differentiating between the somewhat similar DNA, but ultimately different DNA of the goat and the sheep. So the machinery has trouble understanding what's going on. And as a result, the zygote will not form. Yes, ligers are real. That's the next aspect we'll talk about with regards to hybrid inviability. Sorry. So hybrid inviability, the offspring dies before birth or before reproductive maturity. So in the case of ligers or tigers and leopards, once they are crossed, they can successfully mate. Zygote formation can happen, but in 99% of cases, the zygote formation will either have a severe defect or error, and that will result in miscarriage or stillborn offspring. So 99% of the liger zygote formations don't make it to term. But in 1%, a liger can be born, but it dies before maturity. So it usually dies before the age of 5, and it's unable to reproduce and pass on its genetic code. Same thing with tigons. Yeah, really all that, like I said earlier with that big cat family, those are all technically, you can all see technically them mate, but those post-zygotic mechanisms will eventually take over with about 99% success to prevent that mixing of the gene pool. Alrighty, and then the last part Hybrid infertility. This is where offspring can actually survive to term, but they are unable to reproduce. Mules are a sterile hybrid offspring of a horse and a donkey mating. So mules are completely sterile. And again, I use the word hybrid here. Hybrid means something different in the context of evolution than it does in genetics, because a hybrid is an offspring cross of between two different species in this context. In evolutionary contexts, hybrid is an offspring cross between two different species, whereas a hybrid in genetics is a cross between two different traits within the same species. So careful not to get them mixed up, okay? Apparently there are whale dolphins. I don't know. I've never heard of it. I believe it though. They are very similar offshoot species. Pisley, what's that? Panda grizzly bear? I'm assuming panda grizzly bear. Grizzly polar bear. Oh, cool. Wait, so can you breed a female donkey and a male horse? Because Wikipedia says specifically the other way around. Yeah, it has to be the other way around because of some of the genetic mechanisms, the pre-zygotic mechanisms that are in place. I'm pretty sure it has to be a male donkey and female horse, right? Is that what it says, Kiora? Yeah, it has to be that way. Again, it has to do with those pre-zygotic mechanisms. Something to do with the male horse, and for lack of a better word, the structure of his penis. It's unable to allow for the correct fertilization of the female donkey. Cattle and bison, beefalo. Yeah, male horses would not be able to successfully fertilize a female donkey. It has to be the other way around due to those pre-zygotic mechanisms in the context of don't, oh God, don't Google that. Don't Google that. Don't say that anything about my class associating with Googling. Some people just don't look up terrible things. Some people just stick to like looking up nice things on YouTube and reading things that are scientific and neat. It's all over Instagram. Why is that on Instagram? What do you look at on the internet? Yeah, I think we're I think we're all more curious about Maddie than why some people have not looked it up. All right, let's take a look at that next spot before you all fall too far down the hole of Googling things and then your parents are asking why you are Googling horses genitalia. And then I have to explain that we talked about why only a female horse and male donkey are able to successfully producing a mule. So I'll blame it on Maddie. Yes, I suspect that it will somehow come back to me, but blame it on the demon. So let's take a look at the next type of, oops. That's not what I wanted. The next type of speciation that can occur, we're going to look at allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation. This is where two different areas allow for that type of speciation. So in this case, we have a tree species or an evergreen separating and as a result of a ravine separating the initial population, two different species can arise due to that geographical isolation. Once they are separated from each other in that ravine, Subtle differences in the environment of those individual areas lead to those microevolutionary changes, and that's what we call allopatric speciation. Allo, again, of the Latin root word meaning different, as you two stop arguing in the chat. So allopatric speciation, different areas where two species can develop as a result of geographic isolation. Sympatric speciation, sim of the Latin root word origin for the same, happens when evolution of a species within the same area allows for a new species to arise. And the main reason it can arise is that one specific type of species that changes itself or changes due to natural environment, it's able to utilize and adapt to different resources that are in the same area. Now, the best way to explain this here is that with regards to plants, they can fix nitrogen in many different ways. And what that allows for them to do is to go through photosynthesis more successfully. But there are different ways with which to fix nitrogen. They can get it from specific nitrites that are found naturally in the ground. They can also form connections with fungus that can break down specific dead things and provide nitrogen. So really, it's an adaptation of how those specific species utilize different resources. And if a species can change the way that it adapts to those specific different resources available, it will create a completely unique species in the same area, And that's sympatric speciation. So, and then that's what we see here. The same area, unique species arises as a result of its utilization of resources differently. Wait, why does the line pointing to the image say? It says unique species, unique species. Let me type that. Unique species. Unique species. Yeah, no worries, Emily. Unique species. All righty. Any questions about allopatric or sympatric speciation? Because there's still one more type of speciation we got to look at. Any questions about either of those types of speciation? Can you give an example of both? Yeah, so with allopatric speciation, we have a, one second. So with the allopatric speciation, we have an evergreen tree population shown here. Let me change the color. Evergreen population shown here. A ravine runs through it now as a result of years of change and erosion from a nearby river and lake, and it split the population in half. Now, at the time it splits and that ravine forms, they're the same species. But as a result of that ravine, the ravine washes away some of the nutrients that are on the right side, for example. Really, it's just about how the ravine forms, and it erodes some of the dirt underneath those trees, and it prevents those trees from gaining access to a specific nutrients. Those trees then have to find that nutrients in a different way, and that's an adaptation that it makes, and it changes the way that it gets its nutrients, and it's as a result of a geographical separation from the place that it used to get those nutrients from. And then with regards to sympatric speciation, as we talked about it earlier, if the evergreen population seen here, it gets all of its nitrogen fixed from soil, just normal soil, any nitrogen that's found there, it gets the nitrogen. But if for some reason a mutation happened within the small, tiny population that was close by to funguses, for example, those evergreens would be able to get their nitrogen from the fungus, which is way better at providing nitrogen than the ground would. And so it hasn't changed locations, nothing shifted in the environment. It's just made use of a different resource in the same area without going anywhere. Okay. And so that's an example of sympatric and allopatric speciation. All righty. Any other questions? Again, these are slow processes. I can't stress that enough. These take millions of years to happen. It's not just like next week you're going to be able to say, oh, yeah, look at this tree. It's gone through sympatric species. No, it takes millions of years, okay? All right, last part. 1 second, let me just... All right. Any other questions with regards to allopatric or sympatric speciation? All right, let's look at the last example of speciation. Speciation as a result of polyploidy. I've already kind of alluded to polyploidy earlier with regards to our genetic studying, but we're going to talk a little bit about it in this context. So what polyploidy is, if you recall, polyploidy is bad for humans. Anything more than 2n, which is polyploid, polyploidy meaning more than the normal or more than 2. Polyploidy means more than a set of 2n. It's not ideal for humans. It's actually quite bad. And it will produce a non-viable fetus, meaning that fetus that will develop to term, if it does, won't be able to pass on its genes. It's seen as having low fitness in evolution standards, and it won't be able to reproduce and pass its genes on. Now, in plants, however, polyploidy can actually be quite advantageous. In strawberries, for example, it develops larger fruit, no seeds, as well as larger leaves. And so polyploids can actually reproduce with each other, but not the original parents, as a result of the desire to continue this polyploid trait. So any strawberry that you see is more likely, it's more likely to be that normal ploidy or biploidy if it's smaller. And if you see a strawberry that's quite large, it's more likely to be polyploid. And that produces a specific advantage in terms of reproduction. And so does it count as genetic modification? No, it does so naturally. It can do so naturally. It can do so naturally. Yeah. All righty. So that is it for this lesson. If you want to stick around and ask questions about the lab or anything else, I'm happy to do so. If you want to ask questions about the quiz that's coming up, I'm going to finish writing the quiz today, and I'll give you the quiz outline tomorrow in time for the quiz on Thursday. But if you want to head out to work on your lab, I will support that. I will be here for the next 30 minutes still to answer any and all questions. Is lab a quiz? Yes. The lab is due Wednesday, lab quiz Thursday. Okay. Otherwise, folks, see you later, folks. Have a good one. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'll still be sticking around if you have questions you want to pop back in, okay? Does the lab count? Yes, for communication marks. Do at the beginning of class. Correct. Beginning of class. All righty, folks. See you later. Bye, everyone. All right. All right, Laganji. Everyone's gone. So did you see your mark for the lab activity? Oh, or sorry, for the unit 2 assignment. Okay. So it probably won't be for a bit. But I'm open to having a conversation with you about it and to have you not necessarily redo it, but to explain some of your answers a little bit more so I can see a little bit of the understanding that you maybe didn't really demonstrate in the recordings, because you saw your mark as you saw. And so it probably won't be this week or next week, just because you have your lab activity I want you to focus on this week. But next week, maybe we'll talk about setting up a time where you can explain to me and talk to me about some of the stuff from the assignment. Okay. How does that sound? Yeah. So we'll talk about it. Not this week necessarily, but the week after, and then we'll kind of go from there. Okay. Okay, cool. Sounds good. How's the lab activity going? Have you done the lab yet? Good. Okay, so you should be studying from that and from your notes for the lab quiz on Thursday, okay? Okay. All right, Laganjit. If you want to stick around and do some work, you're more than welcome to. But if you head out, enjoy your afternoon. I'll see you online tomorrow, okay? You're welcome. Bye, Laganjit.